So in this part of our tutorial, we're going to see a for loop in action. So we're going to create one, and we're just going to have it increase count by 1 with each iteration. So after the for loop has finished running, it's going to spit out a different value of count, which will be based on how many times the loop has run. So we're going to start our loop at 0, we're going to increment by 1 each time, and we're going to stop the loop once it's run 5 times. So by the end of it, count should be equal to 5 if we start it at 0. Now that we've had a basic introduction to for loops, let's take a look at one actually in action. So we're just going to create a simple loop that will increase an integer, which we'll call count, by 1 with each iteration of the loop. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create our integer. Let's call this count, and we'll just initialize it to be 0. So we've just created this integer here, and this is what we'll be increasing by 1 each time. So let's put our loop in the viewDidLoad function. Again, this is in iOS, so this is the viewDidLoad rather than the onCreate. So we're going to put it here because this is going to be the main function that's going to run. If we put it outside of the loop, outside of this function, it might still run, but best to put it inside. Okay, so we'll start off with our for, and let's just set up the brackets first. Okay, and so we'll start the count at 0, and we'll go until, let's just go until 5, and we will increase I by 1 each time. Now I'm going to show you a little extra. So usually we'll do this, I equals I plus 1, and this increases I by 1 each time. It's taking the old value of I, and it's basically just adding 1 to it. But we can do the same thing with this operator here. This is the double, it has the variable that we want to increase and the double plus sign. It's basically doing exactly the same thing as I equals I plus 1. So I'm going to keep using this though. It's a little faster to do the I++, but if we were increasing this by more than 1, then we'd have to do this. So for example, if we wanted to increase it by 2, we would have to do this rather than the I++. Okay? So either way, if I end up writing the I++ instead of the I equals I plus 1, you know exactly what's going on. And same with I minus minus. So we have I minus minus, not is. So this is doing exactly the opposite. It's just subtracting, so it's saying I equals I minus 1. Again, just so you know that that's what's going on if you see them. Okay, so we have our loop set up. We are starting the count at 0. We're going for 5 iterations because we're increasing the count by 1 each iteration, and we're going until I is 5, at which point we'll stop and we'll exit the loop. Okay, so each iteration we're just going to do count plus plus. So this is basically just, again, same thing as count equals count plus 1, but it's a slightly faster and slightly cleaner way of writing it. So this loop is just going to increase count by 1 each iteration. Okay, so it'll start at 0 again, increase I by 1, so the first iteration count will be 1, second iteration 2, third will be 3, and up until I is 5, at which point again we'll exit the loop. So let's just see this in action. If we go to run, and we'll run it with the iPhone 5S, and actually I guess first we should have count print out. So let's do that now. So let's have the label text be count and then toString, because we want to print out the final count, and this is going to be outside of the loop because we want count to increase as much as it will during the loop, and then we'll print out the final value of count. So let's run this again with the iPhone 5S, and we'll see what our final result will be. So let's just wait for this to load up here, and we get count equaling 5. That's exactly right because we're running this loop again 5 times, hence the I less than 5 and then I equals I plus 1. So this is pretty much exactly the same thing as saying count plus plus, count plus plus, and doing that 5 times. Okay? And that's the great thing about these loops is that you don't have to write out count plus plus 5 times. You can just write it once and let the loop do the rest of the work for you. Okay, so this is just a very simple for loop that's just increasing count by 1 each time, but this is very basic and we can do a lot more complex and fun things with for loops, which we'll take a look at after this video. In this part of the tutorial, we saw a for loop in action and we used iOS to code it. So we created a loop that started at 0 and incremented by 1 and ran until 5, so that was 5 iterations of this loop. And all it did was it increased count by 1 each time, so count was just our integer variable. We started at 0, and again we increased it by 1 with each iteration of the loop, and printed out the final value at the end, which turned out to be 5, because again we ran our loop 5 times, increasing count by 1, so total of 5. And by now you should be able to create a for loop and understand what's happening if you see a for loop in code. So take a look at how much it's incrementing by, where it starts, and when it's going to stop.